Hello, my name is Paul Michaud, and I'm the CEO of Proceve. In this video, we're going to talk about how Proceve supports workflows. So, Proceve supports the creation of complex nested workflows, and most importantly, we allow you to define your workflow, set it up, maintain it, change it, and whatever else you need to do, all from within the user interface. Any user who has the appropriate permissions can modify the workflow as needed without the need to get a developer involved, as is often the case with other software. Um, so, what's the structure of the workflow? So, Perceive allows you to define a workflow and have a whole bunch of sub workflows associated with it. So it's not just one workflow with stages. You can literally define sub workflows. Those sub workflows, like other things in our software, can have their own sub workflows, which have their own, and so on. And you can go a lot of levels deeper, essentially unlimited if you want, for really complex workflows. That being said, in my experience, most of the time, it's pretty rare to need more than one level of sub workflow, maybe up to two. Um, but if you need it, we can support the most complex workflows that you can imagine up. Each of those sub workflows are comprised of a whole bunch of stages. It could be a simple case like this where we progress linearly from stage A to stage B to stage C to stage D, or you can even define a workflow where there's four stages and there's no specific flow. You can literally go all the way from stage A to D or from stage A to C, etc. It's up to you to decide whether or not that transition goes in a restricted way from A to B to C to D, or whether or not it's completely unrestricted, or where this is a linear workflow here on this sub workflow B, you can also do things like I can come in and go, well, I might need to loop back at stage D. I might need to go back to A, for example, or I might need to go from stage D and actually go and connect to something that's part of sub workflow A. And whatever the case is, we can support that in the way we've designed the software. In addition, each of the lines, are what we refer to as stage transitions. These are the connections between one stage and another stage. And inside the software, you can define, well, which stages is it allowed to connect to? Is there actions, for example, that get performed on the transitions? Does it require certain entitlements or restrictions on it? For example, in order to move from stage C to D, do you need a person with a particular role and or entitlements to actually allow it to move from C to D? But the design of the software actually allows for that. One of the things that we want to point out that we sort of are pretty you know we've sort of taken a slightly different approach, and we believe a more correct approach is inside our software, unlike most other vendors, we actually make a distinction between the stage that an item is at in a workflow versus the status that artifact has. And they're just not the same. And too often we see other software treating them as if they are exactly the same. And it results in people creating weird workflows to sort of mix stages and status, and instead of actually sort of treating it correctly and keeping them separately. So stages are just those steps within a workflow. Whereas status is a state or a condition that applies to the artifact. And something can be in one stage and potentially have over time many different statuses, even while it's in the same stage. Statuses we have collectively grouped into sort of four buckets internally in our software. Statuses that are related to progress, statuses related to activity or lack thereof on any given item, statuses that sort of define dependency type relationships, and just an other bucket for various miscellaneous statuses that might be relevant over time. So let's look at this as an example. I can have an item that is in the to-do stage of a workflow, and at one point in time, it could still be on time. If it's something that's not due to get worked on, doesn't have a deadline or a milestone to achieve, it could be totally on time. But on the other hand, I could actually have something still sitting in the to-do state and it's already past its target due date or its deadline, in which case its status is overdue, despite the fact that it has the exact same stage that it did earlier and on time. So the two are not related. Similarly, on the activity side, I can be working on a particular item, in which case its status from an activity perspective is that it's in progress. But maybe for some reason something came up and that task had to be paused. Well, now its status could go to paused, or it could be interrupted, or etc. And its stage actually doesn't change. It could be in an in progress stage or a to do stage or whatever. But for some reason, activity wise, it's gotten changed. On the dependency side, dependencies, typically could be none or blocked or blocking. So if I don't depend on anything and nothing depends on me, then dependency wise, its status is none. If I'm blocking something, then my status might be blocking. Some other task is waiting on this one that's holding it up. At the same token, it could also be blocked by another task. So in theory, you could be at a single stage with a single artifact, and it could be both blocked and blocking because it's blocked by one artifact and blocking another task, right? So it can actually have both states status-wise simultaneously, but that only has meaning when you look at which items it's actually being blocked or blocking by. And again, and then there's various others that are sort of more miscellaneous. So what's a complex workflow look like? So here I've put together an example of a complex software workflow. And you can see here I've got 4 sub-processes, one related to requirements, one to implement the requirements, which is typically going to be applied to the task artifacts. Then I've got one for testing, right? And then I've got one for operations, right, where we deploy and operate. And you can see each of those sub workflows actually has their own process inside it, including branching and looping back, etc., and even cross linkages where we go, once we approve a requirement, we might automatically use the actions in the workflow to create the task to implement that requirement. We might simultaneously create the placeholder test to test the requirement. We could also create the task to write the test. So you can get really, really complex as to what it does and how they behave. And you can see that as we approve a requirement, we now initiate, the implement process. And then once we get approved and we've committed the software and deployed it to the test environment, we can actually go and we can initiate the test process. So you can get crosstalk between sub workflows, etc. And, again, we allow all of this complexity to be dealt with, if you need it. That being said, most people are not going to need this, right? If you want to just simply say, I'm going to treat the requirement or a task as if it's the only artifact type that we use, and I'm just going to walk it through all the way through a single linear process, that's completely cool. And, we'll support that workflow as well. But if you're a large enterprise with very complex processes that are strictly enforced, then we can support that also.